This is a quick overview of the 96 boards on semiconductor dual camera mezzanine module that fits on top of the Ultra 96 V2 FPGA platform. This is a nice little board. It has a bunch of features on it. So we can see from here we have features to pilot, is it Polite? IAS compatible imaging modules. And then those are on semiconductor, or at least based on imaging sensors from on semiconductor. And then these are interfaced into an AP1302 imaging coprocessor. And though that all gets fed into that's all going to be controlled by the FPGA. And then we're going to run Pedal Linux on top of that, which is going to handle the application side of it. So it's also got a MIPI interface on there. That's for video, or it's a DIPI. Okay, so the MIPI is going to be those interface for the cameras. And so here you got feature list is two IAS sensor modules and then the AP1302 imaging coprocessor. The target apps, there's IoT, AI, computer imaging. Let's see, you go down here, there's a block diagram where you can see there's a low speed connector, 40 pin connector, and then that's where that goes. And then imaging processor is a clock, and there's a high speed 60 pin connector, and that's where your display connector is at. And then both of these are fed into here, and there's the imaging sensor module. So those are the two modules. There's a connector, imaging coprocessor, and then the image gets out. So they're getting basically combined into one image. I think there's a way you can disable one or the other, but I think by default it's all going to the image coprocessor and getting combined. And then some parts information as far as pricing and stuff like that with that. And so let me see, we got that. Yeah, and so here we have the two imaging modules here on the board itself. Coprocessor somewhere perhaps there. There's a video out interface here as well, but I haven't found much information as far as how to use it, if it's actually functioning. There's a bunch of jumpers here that you can put on here, and this has different features as far as how to configure this. I'm just using a default out of the box. Here's where you can see the 40 pin um, low speed connector out here. That's I guess you can stack. I don't know. Make sure there's no incompatible interfaces. And then on the side here, they broke out the reset and the power button. So here you can actually power the whole board through this button and then reset it. This all gets tied into the Ultra 96 V2 rather than having to reach down there. The only problem is if you're going to load hardware definitions inside here, you got to put it in JTAG mode. And so it's pretty tight in there on the side. If you can see, it's pretty tight. So I don't know if I can flip those switches from there to try to do that. Otherwise, you're gonna have to take this whole module off, which is gonna be a bugger. Also, I have the JTAG module here. That's something I had to purchase separately to get that. And then I have this nice 3D printed case that I've found on Thingiverse. The only I can't see it. So there, the 3D printed bottom of it. It's a little solid. I need to cut some holes in it because the heatsink doesn't get. It's getting pretty hot, so it needs more ventilation. They got some vents on either side, but it probably needs a fan that runs and blows through. Otherwise, it needs more ventilation on the bottom. But it does hold it, nicely. I had to add over here this cable tie, and then this tie here. The cable tie was to keep this from flopping up and down, and this was to keep the cable from flopping up and down. I want to break the connector, and then I didn't want to break the two connectors on the Ultra 96. Yeah, you can see at the bottom there, this plugged into the Ultra 96, and you can kind of see there in the white connector, that's the high-speed connector, and then there's the low-speed connector as well. So it's a nice compact little package that you have here with the two imaging processors, or two imaging modules, and the one imaging processor. And this does some imaging we can do with this, and then has an example that was posted on Element 14. There's an out of box, and then you can build. I went through the build process for the Pedal Linux for this. Build Pedal Linux also builds a hardware definition as well to run the modules, to run an example. That took well over a day, probably a day and a half for that to build on my old Dell T110, PowerEdge T110 quad Xeon processor system, um, and then the VM that I have that's on top of that. And then I've also built a hardware one too, but that requires Pedalonics to run anyways. And then I've also run some out of box examples. Um, and so kind of go back and forth with that. And other than that, I haven't been able to figure out how to get OpenCV to see the image from this as well. So I'm still trying to work on that. So I'm just stuck with whatever I have for that. So that's just a basic overview of the module and see what we can do with it.